Hi, everyone. I'm David, and I'm the engineering manager at Spotify for a team called Hot Sauce. We manage our version control systems, so we ensure developers can focus on shipping features faster and allow the music to keep playing. Over to you, Sanjana.
Hey everyone, my name is Sanjana and I'm a product manager at Spotify. I work across two squads, or teams as they're commonly known as outside of Spotify. One of them focuses on our fleet-wide automated code changes, while the other is David's team, and we manage the version control systems here. David?
Today, we're here to share with you a journey of our engineering history over the last decade. But before we dive into that, I want to tell you a little bit more about Spotify and the scale that we operate on. Today, Spotify has over 600 million users in 180 countries around the world, making Spotify a truly global platform. And behind the play button for your favorite songs, playlists, and podcasts, we have over 2,800 engineers working across 500 teams that are continually evolving and transforming the way they work together to deliver even more and exciting and innovative features such as audiobooks and AI DJs. Every day, our engineering team make almost 3,000 production deployments. To put that in perspective, that is two changes every minute of every single day, 365 days a year. And we do this all while the music never skips a beat.
With over 600 million users, each one of us has our own unique tastes, and Spotify caters to every single one of them. Spotify has grown from music to podcasts and now audiobooks that have been released in multiple different countries. My personal favorite podcast happens to be Bill Simmons' The Ringer. What's your favorite audiobook, David?
I would have to say my favorite book is The Goal, a process of ongoing improvement. Well, to continue what we were saying, Spotify has over 190,000 GitHub repos, and these are spread across 2,800 GitHub organizations. Additionally, we have 8.8 million lines of code that are managed by automatic bots making automated changes. But we didn't always operate at this scale. The path to get here involved a huge technological and cultural transformation over the last 10 years. Over to you, Sanjana.
As with everything at Spotify, audio is at the heart of everything we do. So let me take you through the playlist for today for the next 35 minutes or so. We'll start with the early days at Spotify, where we started, how we changed, and move on to some of the cultural shifts as well as technological shifts that we have grown into. After that, we're going to dive into fragmentation and look at how we solve this problem for our developer experience. And after that, we'll touch on our AI investments and share about some exciting prospects for our future. To kick off, David will take you through our early days and take you through some of the cultural and technological transformations that we have gone through over the years. Over to you, David.
I want to highlight some of Spotify's culture, the magic secret sauce that enables us to do what we do. At Spotify's heart, we have 5 core values. We're innovative, playful, collaborative, passionate, and sincere. We like to think of ourselves as being part of a band, working together to achieve that perfect performance. But not all performances start out as masterpieces, and this is a story of that journey. While all of our values have shaped where we are today, I'd like to focus on 2 in particular themes that are themes throughout our talk and long-standing collaboration with GitHub. Change is the only constant. As a company grows and evolves, things change, and how you adapt to these and how you react to these technological shifts define your technical strategy. The second is software engineering is a team sport, and although you can write code alone, to really truly build large-scale applications, they involve people, tools, and processes. And the way that you build them and define those processes define the way you work together. Now that I've shared a little bit about Spotify's culture, I'd like to talk you through the early days and our evolution through all of those changes. We start our journey in the early 2010s, Spotify was still fairly small. We had 23 SREs managing our data centers, and we were available in only 28 markets around the world. Servers and data centers ruled. Servers had names, they had feelings, and they were named after Greek mythology in fun and interesting ways. And all that mattered was uptime. Provisioning of new hardware was completely coordinated through spreadsheets. We did find a small opportunity to sprinkle some automation on top of this, so we built a system called ServerDB. When purchasing new hardware, we received spreadsheets from our vendor with basic information such as MAC address and serial numbers. We then imported these into ServerDB, which gave it human names and purposes. These were then re-exported to yet another spreadsheet, and that got sent over to our data centers for racking and stacking and installation. It's worth pointing out that at this time, there were no fancy interfaces, and everything was driven by a command line interface. Speaking of command line interfaces, around the time that we were fighting with spreadsheets, we were also trying to evolve our version control system. In 2014, Spotify was using Gerrit to manage our Git repositories, and the world looked very, very different. While this worked, the industry was shifting. Developers had started becoming more familiar with a tool called GitHub, and GitHub was becoming the industry standard for version control systems. Developers used it in open source as well as private collaboration, and our engineers wanted the same user experience from their internal tooling. We had two primary goals when evolving our version control system. They were to increase the code quality, and we believed that a collaborative code review process would enable this. Pull requests enabled our engineers to work together across time zones to make sure that only the best code made it into production. The second was we wanted to ensure that every commit was backed by continuous delivery. We wanted to ensure that only the best quality code made it into our releases. And we wanted to ensure that everything passed all of our quality checks as well as our standards. We did a kickoff pilot in late 2014, and we ran user surveys across our engineers. And the result was our engineers wanted GitHub. They were already using it for open source versions, and they were familiar with the workflows. PRs and inline comments were the industry standard and had become the staple. In May 2015, we'd successfully shut down our Gerrit instance, and we'd fully migrated over to GitHub Enterprise Server self-hosted. Who would have thought that roughly 10 years later, we would be on the stage at GitHub Universe talking about that journey with you all? With our new shiny GitHub server, our engineers were free to release more often to our users. As our engineers created more features and our user base grew, we hired more engineers. And as a side effect, the components grew. Spotify has always been a fan of embracing microservices. And as a result, we had more and more services to keep track of. We needed a better way of keeping track of all of this. ServerDB only knew about hardware. We evolved our platform, and we created a new service, and we called this ServiceDB. We linked them together, and this allowed engineers to browse services as well as figure out where they were deployed. Now we had a way to work together between developers and operations. The tools complemented each other. As time passed, Spotify grew even more, and our engineers started looking upwards towards the clouds. This transition away from physical hardware to the cloud opened up a unique opportunity for another level of automation. All of a sudden, a single click of a button could handle something that would have taken weeks or even months with multiple tickets backwards and forwards between developers and operations. Our platform organization started inventing a whole new set of tools for our developers to enjoy. They were, however, scattered all over our system, and without core tribal knowledge, they were very, very difficult to find. This simplification created an explosion of new services and enabled hypergrowth. As you can see with the graph, the blue line represents the number of components, and the green line represents the number of engineers. And this created an exponential growth of the components over time. And this incredible growth created a new set of problems for our platform teams to solve, but a little bit more on that later. Let's focus a little bit more on the discoverability problem and how servers, services, and cloud morphed into Backstage as it is today. Backstage started internally as a small pilot project with a small set of team trying to build a unified experience to solve a unified experience, and eventually it became the most widely used developer tool inside Spotify. We also wanted to know more about these services than simply where it was deployed. Things like, is it running in production? Who owns it? And who to page when something goes wrong. With Backstage, we wanted to give our developers a homepage, a place to find things, and it all started with a software catalog, a searchable, browsable list of all the software inside Spotify. This catalog keeps metadata about every piece of software inside Spotify, who owns it, and how it relates to other pieces of software. This software catalog stays up to date since the metadata is stored alongside the source code in GitHub. This distributed the responsibility of keeping that metadata up to date to the teams managing that source code and inspired us on a journey upwards towards GitOps and workflows. The catalog helped tremendously in finding new things, but it wasn't enough. We still had technical documentation scattered all over the place, and to make matters worse, it was always out of date. So we added tech docs, and we built these on top of Markdown files stored in the Git repository, and we linked those into Backstage as well. Each service in the catalog had its own dedicated space. There was an overview page with general information such as where it was hosted, what was going on, who to page when something went wrong, as well as browsing your documentation. For each service in the catalog, there were additional fields and places to look for build history, capacity management, deploy status, and traffic routing. We could reroute traffic between regions from Europe to America with a click of a button. You can think of this like mission control for your production systems. This linked our systems together, and we have GitHub at the heart with all the data contained in our source repositories. And our API for configurability was pull requests. With all this deep focus on problem solving for discoverability over the years, I'd like to hand it over to Sanjana to talk about some of our other developer experience problems, such as fragmentation.
Thanks, David. Spotify seriously started inventing or investing in developer experience over the last 8 years because we saw some very troubling trends. The development of new features and the shipping of these features was getting much slower, and it was getting harder to onboard new hires. Spotify had gone through years of hypergrowth, with the number of developers quadrupling every single year. We went from a small company to this huge organization. There were lots of people onboarding and getting up to speed. And the organization was shifting so fast that it was hard to keep track of who owned what. We knew things were a bit chaotic, but it wasn't clear how this was affecting developer productivity. To dig deeper, we took an intense look at the day-to-day life of our developers to really understand what was making their lives difficult in the hope that we could find a solution for it. And of course, in this process, we wanted to unblock faster development. What we found were two major problems. First, it was hard to do things the right way fast. All that growth had left our software ecosystem so scattered that it caused confusion to our developers in terms of how to build services the right way and ship them quickly. The second problem that our developers encountered was the burden and the maintenance toil that came along with the hypergrowth of components that David shared. This means managing builds, deployments, security audits, upstream dependency breaking changes. These were parts of the software lifecycle that weren't at all related to feature development in any way, shape, or form. our developers were wasting a huge amount of time doing these things, and our satisfaction surveys were tanking. So now we had this great developer portal, which made it easier to find things, while our platform team was working on figuring out solutions for the infrastructure toil problem. It was really clear to us that we needed to centralize and manage more of that software lifecycle. We wanted to take away the infrastructure pain from our developers so that they could focus on purely business impact. But we couldn't, not for everyone anyways. The reason was that our software ecosystem was extremely fragmented. Every single team was building and deploying these services differently, and this made it hard for us to automate. Thus marked the beginning of cultivating a tech health strategy at Spotify to enable developers to become productive and efficient. So we created something called Golden Paths, a gold standard of how to develop software at Spotify. These documented our best practices at the time, and they have been living documents ever since. We started having every single new hire go through these tutorials, which are written in tech docs, and of course, they're stored in GitHub repos. We created our first Golden Path for backend development, which covered how to get your environment set up, as well as deploy your backend application. You won't believe it, but it was 21 pages long. I know. I encourage everyone here to document your developer experience, and I'm sure we can swap the same horror stories. Over time, we condensed our golden paths, and despite shrinking, they covered more ground now than they did before. By focusing on eliminating steps and making it easier to build and deploy applications, it became easier to onboard and operate services day to day. We then introduced something called Golden Technologies. These were a standard set of languages, infrastructure, as well as frameworks which are expected and sometimes mandatory to be used for all production components at Spotify. Using them allowed developers to focus on their end user features, since maintenance became something that platform teams were taking care of. Finally, golden state is the desired state of where we want all our software components to be. It's a target state in which we want our tech stack to be, so that we can easily manage our entire fleet of software components and keep them up to date, bringing everyone across the company into new technological paradigms, enabling Spotify to keep up with the ever-evolving technology landscape in this world. So, to keep it simple, you have to follow the golden path using golden technologies to get to golden state. This is our simple but effective tech health strategy. To make it even easier to adhere to the best practices, we created something called software templates. Instead of creating new software by copying an old repository, which may have outdated code, developers could now spin up their own services with just a click of a button in Backstage, setting up their entire service. This click in Backstage would then result in calls to our GitHub repository and set up a GitHub repository with all the configurations and features already set up and ready to go. Of course, this had immediate effects. It was easier than ever to create new software, which our developers loved, and our platform team, well, they loved it even more because now the software adhered to the current standards by default. This standardization allowed us to automate away some of the infrastructure toil. Staying with the theme of automating away infrastructure toil, can anyone in the audience take a guess at what we're looking at here? Somebody said viruses? Services, microservices. Oh my God, that's a good guess. Yes, it's actually true. This is a real-life dependency graph of all the services that we have in production in Spotify. You can see how complex and intricate this web of services is, with every edge being a dependency and every node being a service. So if we had to automate away the infrastructure toil that our developers were facing, well, we had quite a task at our hand. And we had no other option but to rely on automation. So we introduced a new program called Fleet Management. Fleet management is basically split into 3 pieces. The first piece is making sure that everything is versioned and codified. And this was managed by making the integrations to GitHub, and using their flexible APIs and standard workflows, we were able to get all of this done. The second piece of the problem was to make it easy to make changes at the click of a button for a single repository. So if you wanted to expose your service to the internet, you had to find an easy way to do this for our developers. The third part of the problem was to do this at scale across hundreds of thousands of repositories, because as you all know, we have 190,000 GitHub repositories. And guess what? We did all 3. We built automation to ensure that we could address all 3 parts of the problem, and the results were absolutely impressive. We saw huge savings and infrastructure toil savings for our developers, and our developers just needed to focus on building killer end-user features like Spotify Wrapped, audiobooks, AI DJ, and the like, without having to worry about migrations, upgrades, or any of those boring maintenance tasks. An example of the impact of fleet management is the Log4j vulnerability. As you all may already know, Log4j had a very critical vulnerability which was causing a lot of code in the world to become vulnerable. Well, at Spotify, with fleet management, we were able to resolve this incident and help secure 80% of our fleet in just 9 hours. The rest, 20% of our fleet, the rest of the 20% of our fleet got the update within a few days, and within 8 days, our entire software ecosystem was completely secure, and we didn't have the vulnerability anymore. Like any good data-driven company, we were measuring the effects of all these systems that we had developed. The change was absolutely astounding. A metric that we had established earlier on was the time for a new hire to create their 10th pull request. This corresponded well to the new hire feeling comfortable, and also it comes to a point where they feel they're well onboarded and able to contribute to their product's code. When we first started measuring this, it was 60 days. Imagine that, 2 months before a new hire could contribute to the code base. Today, that number is sitting steady at just 20 days. By making it easier to find things, including documentation, and standardizing our technology, our new hires are now contributing at 1/3 of the time productively compared to what they were before. This alone was a tremendous return on investment for us, and one that compounds every year as we hire new developers every single day. But it wasn't just new hires who were benefiting from a great developer experience. Our existing engineers saw a reduction of 25% in high urgency incidents and a 56% reduction in local build times. Fleet management not only had a positive impact for managing security vulnerabilities, but also enabled us to ship features faster. This graph shows how long it took for us to build and ship a feature in 2021. So you can see it was about 200 days. With fleet management, we have reduced it to less than a week at this point. The reliance on bots and the tight integration with GitHub has really enabled us to be zero touch. So as you can see from this graph, the number of code changes created and committed by our bots are 3 times more than those of humans. This leads to faster delivery of features to our end users. Now that we had some of our life cycle standardized, it became easier to measure and reason about the impacts on experienced developers. We compared developers who used our golden paths, fleet management, and other preset tools built into Backstage frequently, and whose software closely aligned with these golden paths. And we compared this to our developers who did not use these preset tools as often with less alignment to these standards. The more frequent Backstage users are 2.3 times more active in GitHub, make twice the number of code changes with 17% less cycle time. They also deploy twice as often, with their deployments staying deployed 3 times as long. Can you imagine this at your organization? Twice the code changes, higher quality software, and even better deployment rate? This is just a small taste of the return on investment you can get from making a great developer experience. But what if you can take it one step further and improve developer productivity even more? Over to David to share more.
Thanks, Sanjana. If we look at the start of the talk, it all started with the quote, "Change is the only constant." Over the last few years, we've seen an explosion in AI, and Spotify launched our AI DJ back in 2023. We wouldn't have been able to do this and launch other features such as audiobooks without the great investment in developer experience over the last few years. And at the center of all of these changes has been GitHub. We have been tracking AI data since 2022. And at the start of 2022, the number of developers using AI tools at Spotify was sitting at 13%. Towards the end of 2023, we started an experiment with AI in our developer journey. We started out small with an initial pilot of users, and we gave them access manually, inviting them into Copilot, hand-holding them during the onboarding process, and carefully tracking metrics such as PR cycle time, as well as developer sentiment. After the introduction in Copilot, we're now sitting at 56% of our engineers are using AI tools in their daily workflows. That is a whopping 43 percentage point increase after we adopted Copilot. Now over to how we managed onboarding our users into Copilot. Given the scale that we operate on, and the fact that the team managing GitHub is incredibly small at Spotify, we needed a way to scale this out and automate this so that it wasn't a hand-holding process with manual and changes all around. We worked with GitHub to design a streamlined process, which I will briefly describe. At Spotify, we've made it really easy to access internal tools. Developers can opt into these tools using Backstage with a single click of a button if they're allowed to. All of this is supported and backed by our underlying identity provider system. But anyone that uses any form of single sign-on system should be able to do something similar. GitHub makes it incredibly easy to link the identity provider system into GitHub organizations. And one of the things that you can do in GitHub is you can enable your users to have access to Copilot automatically when they're added into a GitHub organization. And this connection was the key to making our process streamlined. We put these two together, and we sent out an announcement via an email to our mailing group, and we allowed our engineers to self-onboard at their own pace. They were following our documentation that was written in tech docs. And all of this, they were then granted automatic access into Copilot. During the first 2 weeks, we had over 1,000 engineers sign up and gain access to Copilot. For a self-driven workflow with almost no hand-holding or marketing or onboarding experience, this is an incredible achievement for something like Spotify. A special thanks to GitHub's professional services for helping us build a streamlined process that was super easy to follow. I wouldn't have imagined doing this without GitHub's help. And over to Sanjana to talk about our cloud journey next.
Thanks, David. Speaking about making things easy, as you can see at Spotify, we have been working towards and focusing on improving our developer experience over the last 10 years. We have had to continually evolve and innovate. During the first half of this talk, we talked about how we moved our services to the cloud and the growth that this enabled. Well, we're doing the same for Backstage. We have recently launched Spotify Portal for Backstage. This takes all the learning that Spotify has built up over the last 10 years and packages it up into a cloud offering and allows you to simply sign up and get started by using many of the concepts that we have shown throughout this talk. This also comes with all the integrations to GitHub APIs built right out of the box. This ensures that developers can easily focus on delivering end-user features without having to worry about configurations, updates, or any other maintenance toil. And the best part about all of this is that it sits in the cloud, accessible and ready to go. If you'd like to learn more, you can always go to backstage.spotify.com. 10 years of transformation. Wow. As you can tell, we are constantly evolving to build the next best developer experience. And we won't stop here. What's next? As we look to the future, we're really excited to be evaluating GitHub Enterprise Cloud with data residency to see if we can bring our developers the new and cool features even more closer to them in real time in order to improve their productivity as well as happiness. Some of the benefits Spotify is interested in are having real-time access to newly released features, zero downtime for upgrades, isolated company space compared to shared space on github.com. We are still very early in our days of evaluation, and given how central GitHub is to our developer experience, we want to make sure that this is the right path we want to walk down. We want to ensure that we have proper planning and testing and correct security measures in place before going forward with it.
We'd like to thank you on coming to our journey through GitHub. We'd like to thank you for coming to our journey with Spotify through the ages. We hope it was interesting learning about our developer experience and our little history. I'd like to share some advice with you, and that is to use the GitHub APIs, build and integrate, customize the workflows, and integrate them into the way that you work, and make sure that everything is tailor-made for you.
My biggest takeaway would be that I encourage everyone here to go absolutely crazy. Help your developers think outside the box and help them become more productive and efficient by focusing on end-user features. My experience with GitHub has been awesome. The flexible APIs and workflows really help all of us at Spotify be tremendously crazy.
It was impossible to condense 10 years of developer experience into a short 40-minute talk, but we hope we could give you a brief glimpse into all of that.
Thank you for listening to our journey. Hope you all have a great rest of GitHub Universe.
And if you want... Cool. If you want to chat to us, we'll be hanging out with the speaker section. Thanks.